Chapter 124 A Wide Gap, The Last Battle. When Xiao Hingchen and Meng Hingchen walked up to the competition stage, their minds were still preoccupied by Ma Rulong and Xiao Zhaifeng's lost looks. In the previous round, Ma Xiaotao had still managed to defeat them even though she was outnumbered and had to face the frightening attacks of the Class 8 Judgment Sword. Ma Xiaotao didn't just achieve victory, she even dented their confidence. This was especially so for Ma Rulong. Although he was not heavily hurt, he was tormented internally. As their team leader, he still lost even though he had used such a powerful soul tool, combusted his own life power, and had a numerical advantage over Ma Xiaotao. The over-depletion of his soul power meant that his powers would not just stagnate for a year. What was even more frightening was that Ma Xiaotao's black flames had left a trauma in his heart that couldn't be obliterated. Both he and Xiao Zhaifeng had been trounced in their fight. However, Shrek wasn't in good shape either. They no longer had any alternatives. However, they could become the eventual champions of the tournament if they managed to achieve victory in this upcoming 2v2 battle. Younger sister, I must admit that my past opinion about Shrek Academy was wrong. Shrek is really powerful. Xiao Hingchen did not look arrogant anymore. He was still a little pale from the injury he had received, but there was a sense of resilience amidst that paleness that had never been there before. Meng Hingchen sighed. If all their official team members were here, we'd not even stand a chance. Xiao Hingchen looked into the sky. The rain was getting heavier, and there was even a layer of mist in the air. Their clothing was also wet, but didn't become drenched, as their soul power evaporated some of the rain. I must stabilize myself after this tournament. Grandpa was right. It's not a good thing to increase our cultivation so quickly. It's not just because our bodies can't handle the burden. It's more because of our psychological mindset. If I don't stabilize myself, I'm afraid that I'll continue to be unable to reach my peak. Meng Hingchen nodded her head heartily and said, "All right, I shall accompany you." Meng Hingchen's eyes suddenly lit up, but we have to win this battle first. Our partners can't just die for nothing. We must snatch our glory back from Shrek's hands. We must win this battle. Meng Hingchen's eyes lit up too. At this point, she saw Huo Yuao and Wang Dong ascending the stage holding hands. Wang Dong's pinkish blue eyes were filled with his fighting spirit. As Meng Hingchen looked at him, her heartstrings were tugged. Yes, we must win. The four of them took their positions on the competition stage. Their competitive streaks rose as they looked at one another. Besides Meng Hingchen's gaze that carried a slight bizarrerie when she looked at Wang Dong, the rest were all resolute. The four of them also had another feeling at this point. It was as if something had guided all of them to gather on this stage and meet one another in this important tournament. Was this fate? If this was really fate, then perhaps they were destined to be rivals. 5 years later, they would still compete for their respective academies in the Continental Advanced Soul Master Academy Soul Dueling Tournament. They were bound to be the main forces in their respective teams then. What could change after 5 years? They didn't know. Right now, they only knew that they had to be the champions. More than a month had already passed. After all the hard-fought battles and effort they had made, they had finally reached this stage. This was especially so for everyone on Shrek's team. It wasn't easy for them to be standing here in the final. The burning competitive streak in Huo Yuao's eyes dipped a little. In his eyes, a dim golden light subtly appeared. Although he wore an obvious look of innocence, there was also a shocking calmness about him too. Wang Dong and Huo Yuao were different. A light seemed to shine from Wang Dong's body. That pure feeling of light seemed to cause his body to burn up. No matter how gloomy it was or how the raindrops kept on falling, everything around seemed to turn clear as he stood there. Xiao Hingchen was a 5-ring Soul King. His martial soul was a 3-legged golden toad, and he was a Class 5 Soul Engineer. Meng Hingchen was a 5-ring Soul King too. Her martial soul was a vermilion clear ice toad, and she was also a Class 5 Soul Engineer. Huo Yuao had 2 soul rings. His martial souls were the Spirit Eyes and Ice Jade Empress. He was a Class 2 Soul Engineer. Wang Dong had 3 soul rings. His martial souls were the Radiant Butterfly Goddess and the Clear Sky Hammer. The difference in cultivation between both sides was very obvious, but no one thought that the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy would definitely emerge victorious. Huo Yuao and Wang Dong had created a lot of miracles in this tournament. Moreover, Xiao Hingchen and Meng Hingchen were both hurt now, and their soul power had been depleted greatly too. Their soul power could be replenished by soul tools like the milk bottle. But what about their vigor? What about their injuries? Their powers waxed and waned, making the gap in their powers less obvious than the gap in their ranks. Both sides, please step back. The Heaven Fiend Douluo shouted. This was likely to be the last match that he would referee. Huang Dingsu swore to himself secretly that he wouldn't serve as a referee if there was a next time. No one was more shocked than him right now. As the referee, he could truly sense the power of these youths. He saw many things on them that he shouldn't have seen on youths. Top-ranked martial souls, twin martial souls, and even Class 8 soul tools. The transformation of Ma Xiaotao's martial soul earlier left him the most appalled. His Heaven Fiend Lone Star was even unable to entirely resist Ma Xiaotao's black flames. What was it exactly? Were these youths really not even 20 yet? Especially these two representing Shrek Academy now. They were probably not even 15 years old yet, much less 20 years old. However, the expression in their eyes told Huang Jingsu that they were confident they would win. The Heaven Fiend Douluo was even in a slight trance now. That's because he recalled when he was only 15. He was trying his best to cultivate then, and his family hadn't been killed by his Heaven Fiend Lone Star's curse yet, but he didn't even know much about the world of soul masters then. He couldn't imagine how far these youths could go 20 and even 30 years from now. Huo Yuao and Wang Dong held each other's hands as they stepped back. They knew that this was probably the toughest and the most intense battle that they were going to fight ever since they had entered Shrek Academy. It was no longer just a tournament. It was war. It was a war where their lives were at stake. But the more it was like that, the more excited they felt. Their potential seemed to be completely stimulated now. Huo Yuao and Wang Dong were the kind of talented youths that resembled sponges that had fully absorbed water. The greater the pressure, the greater the potential they showed. Before the competition even began, their energies had reached their peaks already. As they held each other's hands, their minds were connected. Huo Yuao's figure flashed, and he moved behind Wang Dong after they retreated to the edge of the competition stage. He placed his hand on Wang Dong's waist, while Wang Dong was calm as he looked opposite him. This was already starkly different from what they had displayed in this tournament before. In the previous rounds, Huo Yuao took the lead when they unleashed their martial soul fusion skill. Everyone believed that Wang Dong was only his aide. Besides unleashing their martial soul fusion skill together, Wang Dong didn't really stand out. The only surprise that he gave was probably when he unleashed his clear sky hammer, but that was the only time. There were very few who remembered Wang Dong, but no one would forget Huo Yuao's 600,000-year soul rings at the start of the tournament. Although everyone found out that it was fake, the shock that they felt was still deeply imprinted in their minds. Huo Yuao was actually standing behind Wang Dong right now. It was obvious that Wang Dong was going to lead this time. No one expected this, even their opponents. After seeing Huo Yuao and Wang Dong's movements, Xiao Hingchen and Meng Hingchen's expressions changed slightly. They discovered that they knew very little about Wang Dong. To everyone, Wang Dong and Huo Yuao came as a single entity. They fought together from the start. But what were his abilities? What was his martial soul? Many were already starting to think about this question. Xiao Hingchen and Meng Hingchen retreated to the edge of the competition stage too. Meng Hingchen stood in front, while Xiao Hingchen took up the rear, but neither of them made any contact with each other. Xiao Hingchen was not physically well yet. His physical body was completely ravaged by Dai Yueheng, and he didn't even dare to use the milk bottle to restore his soul power. That was because his passageways couldn't handle it. His dislocated bones were already set, and his injuries were already healing too. But he still felt tremendous pain throughout his body at times. He was not even up to 30% of his peak condition. That was why he could only aid his younger sister. Meng Hingchen was the one leading now. Meng Hingchen's Class 6 soul tool armor saved her at the last moment when she fought Dai Yueheng, but she was still hurt to some degree. Even so, she still managed to maintain more than 70% of her abilities. More importantly, she was competent in her vermilion ice toad's lethal poison. Dai Yueheng could delay the spread of the poison with his soul emperor cultivation. But what about these two? What cultivation did they have? The tournament would likely end if they were even slightly touched by the vermilion ice toad's poison. The only thing that Meng Hingchen couldn't figure out was why the two of them had such tenacious looks in their eyes. Did they still think that they had a chance in this tournament? They were Shrek's last standing members, and they had no choice but to compete. Meng Hingchen revealed a cold look on her face. Though she was attracted to Wang Dong, this was a competition that involved the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's glory. This tournament might even concern the Sun Moon Empire's glory. She couldn't lose. The pride in her heart had never been inferior to her brother's. The heaven-veined Douluo took in a deep breath. After that, he lifted his right hand up before it jolted downwards. Match, start. As he shouted, everyone opened their eyes wide. Their pupils even shrank. Everyone's attention was drawn to the competition stage. On the city wall, the Dalu Emperor and the White Tiger Duke didn't really converse either. Their palms were pressed on the crenellations, and they were watching the match anxiously. The White Tiger squinted his eyes, and they glowed with light. When he saw Hua Yuao, he had a weird feeling. He couldn't tell what it was exactly, but Hua Yuao naturally drew his attention. Could this young fellow create a miracle? Both parties unleashed their martial souls as the competition began. Meng Hengchen lifted her arms, and 2 streaks of icy blue light instantly appeared. Her armor was damaged, but her class 6 swords were still intact. Her defense might have been weakened without the impregnable wall and armor, but her offensive ability wasn't much affected. Xiao Hengchen took in a deep breath behind Meng Hengchen and repressed the pain in his body. He also unleashed his 3-legged golden toad. Golden metal foam spilled out, and barrels started to appear on his body. Although these metal barrels only formed a third of the barrels that he had formed in the previous round under his golden coagulation and metal manipulation, a sable core formation still appeared. Not only that, but his aura also ballooned, and the opening of every barrel shone with strong light. They also seemed ready to be fired. Xiao Hengchen and Meng Hengchen had mastered long-range soul tools and close combat soul tools respectively. They divided up their roles well, and they excelled in their respective roles. Although Xiao Hengchen was critically injured, one was likely to suffer if he dared to underestimate Xiao Hengchen. When these metal barrels were formed, Xiao Hengchen also formed a thick, pitch-black barrel on his shoulder. When he lifted this barrel, his entire face turned pale. His body also trembled a little. This showed how heavy this soul tool cannon was. Wang Dong and Hua Yuao had already burst towards them as they unleashed their soul tools. The dazzling radiant butterfly goddess appeared behind Wang Dong, whereas Hua Yuao's body was blocked, and he couldn't be seen. Wang Dong had unleashed his martial soul in the previous rounds, but no one had noticed a 3-ring soul master like him. But now he was the center of attention. His blue wings flapped open, and golden light pattern surfaced. An intense aura of light spread, along with his charming looks, and Meng Hengchen was suddenly left in a daze. Meng Hengchen had a sudden feeling that only such a dazzling martial soul was worthy of him. Wang Dong's figure started to rise as his wings flapped open. As they started to flap, he leapt in Meng Hengchen and Xiao Hengchen's direction. Hua Yuao was tightly stuck to Wang Dong's back, and his hands were around his waist. The two of them seemed like the same person now, but Meng Hengchen and Xiao Hengchen couldn't see Hua Yuao's arms around Wang Dong's waist. As Hua Yuao's imitation started to take effect, Wang Dong's speed was naturally inferior to Ma Xiaodao's, but he was not slow. As he flapped his wings, he emitted a dazzling and blinding golden blue radiance which enabled him to quicken his speed through the air. Hua Yuao had also unleashed his soul tool thruster behind him. Although it was only a class 2 thruster, it still allowed Wang Dong's speed to increase by at least 30%. Xiao Hengchen's attack began. Streaks of light shot out, and they started to engulf Wang Dong's body. Since he was a soul engineer, using a long-range soul tool to lock onto his target was very basic. Even though he was critically injured, he was confident that he could strike his opponent. Soul tool rays and soul tool cannon shells engulfed Wang Dong as if they were windstorms. There were even soul tools among them that could lock onto their opponents. However, the two of them fell into a slight trance just as they were about to attack. Xiao Hengchen's attack had already been unleashed, but its lock-on effect didn't work. What was going on? Xiao Hengchen was shocked, but he had unleashed several of his long-range soul tools at the same time. His all-round attack had already been launched. Xiao Hengchen believed that it would be very difficult for Hua Yuao and Wang Dong to resist his wave of attacks with their abilities. He used class 5 soul tools that even soul kings had to be careful of. Moreover, his attack was so condensed. Even if they used the golden road, what kind of effect would it produce? That martial fusion soul skill of theirs was a control type skill, meaning that it was unlikely to strike both Xiao Hengchen and Meng Hengchen. Even if they were struck, nothing would happen. There was no way that Hua Yuao and Wang Dong could get close to them. Xiao Hengchen and Meng Hengchen had the same thoughts, but their eyes soon opened wide. That was because they discovered that they were wrong. Against the attacks of class 5 soul tools, one could dodge instead of resisting them. Wang Dong's wings retracted before he made a breathtaking escape. His pair of wings seemed to have a life of their own. They flapped open before retracting, flapping and drifting. Every transformation adjusted his flying posture slightly. The streaks of soul tool rays and soul tool cannon shells slid past him because they couldn't lock onto him. Wang Dong was like a radiant butterfly goddess that was facing a huge web. No matter how all-engulfing that web was, he could find a loophole to escape. His glittery dodges even left streaks of dazzling shadows in midair. Bright, golden blue flowing light caused the spectators to erupt in cheers. Everyone sympathized with the underdogs. The spectators' emotions reached their height as they witnessed Wang Dong's impeccable dodges. They were even praying for Shrek Academy. It didn't matter whether they had wagered on the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. As the saying goes, the insider knows the ropes, while the outsider just comes along for the ride. The spectators were extremely excited as they watched the competition, but the true soul masters were also wide-eyed right now, including the Dalu Emperor and White Tiger Duke. Those who were observing carefully or soul masters with great visual powers could tell that Hua Yuao's soul tool thruster had developed slight changes as Wang Dong was dodging Xiao Hengchen's attack. This meant that his soul tool thruster had launched, but not with great intensity, but it was these gentle propulsions that enabled Wang Dong to dodge successfully time and time again. The cooperation between the two of them couldn't just be described using great chemistry. They were almost like the same person. However, they would vomit out blood if they knew what Hua Yuao was thinking. Without a doubt, Xiao Hengchen had lost his ability to lock onto Wang Dong because of his spiritual interference. As his spiritual power became stronger, his spiritual interference started to reveal its strength. What enabled Wang Dong's agile dodging of Xiao Hengchen's attacks was naturally the spiritual detection sharing. With both the spiritual interference and spiritual detection sharing, it was not difficult for the two of them to cooperate with each other. Hua Yuao was whining in his heart right now. He was whining about Wang Dong's thin waist. Both his hands were already touching when he hugged Wang Dong's waist. He didn't feel as if he was hugging Wang Dong tightly enough, but Wang Dong's butt was extremely perky and pressed against Hua Yuao's belly. It was a little weird and uncomfortable. Even Hua Yuao was unsure why such a thought would flash across his mind amidst such a tense competition. A series of dodges enabled Wang Dong to slip through the web of soul tool rays and soul tool cannon shells. If Xiao Hengchen were in his peak state, his attacks would be at least 3 times more condensed, practically flawless. No matter how powerful Hua Yuao's spiritual detection was, he wouldn't have been able to help Wang Dong escape then. But they succeeded now. At this point, the gap between both parties had already been reduced to 30 meters. Meng Hengchen's toes were pointed toward the ground, and her tender figure flashed as she moved. She swung her pair of thin swords, and 2 streaks of light were launched towards Wang Dong's path. Her mentality became apparent as she unleashed this strike. That's because she coincidentally shouted, "Be careful." Wang Dong gazed at her deeply, and the light in his eyes became gentler. This caused Meng Hengchen to be stuck in a slight daze. She thought to herself subconsciously, what's he thinking about? Wang Dong turned to his left at this instant and managed to slide in between the 2 streaks of light. But Meng Hengchen's attack wasn't so easily avoided. The light blades struck each other behind Wang Dong and unleashed a layer of icy fog. The vermilion ice toad's lethal poison had finally appeared in this critical last match of the tournament. Below the stage, Elder Sun, Wang Yan, Hikaetu and Xiao Xiao were all extremely anxious. The key lay in whether Hua Yuao and Wang Dong could resist this lethal poison. The icy fog covered a huge area. Wang Dong and Hua Yuao were immediately engulfed, but Wang Dong didn't seem to realize the lethal poison that was coming from his back. His wings revealed a golden light pattern before his second soul ring flashed brightly. A huge number of golden balls of light suddenly appeared. They started to bombard Xiao Hengchen, who had also just unleashed his second wave of attacks. The radiant butterfly goddess' second soul skill, the light of the butterfly goddess. An intense aura of light filled the entire venue. This was everyone's first time seeing the might of Wang Dong's soul skill, with Hua Yuao's imitation covering them. The soul rings that both Hua Yuao and Wang Dong unleashed were white. No one could see exactly what class their soul skills were in, but the power of their soul skills wouldn't change because of this. Wang Dong quickly told Xiao Hengchen with his abilities that underestimating him was a big mistake. An explosive boom reverberated within a 20-meter radius. Logically speaking, Wang Dong's light of the butterfly goddess shouldn't have been able to resist the soul tool rays even if they could resist resist the Soul Tool cannons, but Xiao Hinchen's attack was perfectly intercepted. The explosion only occurred between the two of them. A few of the balls formed by Wang Dong's Light of the Butterfly Goddess landed even in front of Xiao Hinchen and forced him to resist using his impregnable wall. Only a Soul Ancestor's strongest soul skill would have such an effect. Xiao Hinchen cursed in his heart. His cultivation was indeed not up to standard yet, such that the power of his soul tools couldn't be fully unleashed. He was suppressed by Wang Dong's second soul skill, and felt extremely depressed by that. Wang Dong had three rings. With the aid of Huo Yuao's twin martial soul that was close to a 3-ring cultivation, the combination of their soul powers reached above rank 40. Huo Yuao's soul power might only be at rank 28, but the sum of his soul power was not any less than Wang Dong. That was because his second martial soul might have a soul ring. Although most of the power of the 100,000-year soul ring was sealed, his total soul power still managed to increase some. The Haodong power didn't function based on the laws of addition. Wang Dong's Light of the Butterfly Goddess was also a 1,000-year soul skill. Under such a circumstance, their combined strike was already comparable to a top-ranked soul ancestor. They were as powerful as Bei Bei and Shu Sanqi with their unchanged martial souls, and that was without consideration to their martial fusion soul skills. Meng Hingchen was slightly shocked as she saw Wang Dong showing his might. She quickly adjusted her mentality and burst forward rapidly. Her thin swords turned into a sky full of light, projections that slashed down towards Wang Dong. It was a pity that her armor was damaged, otherwise she would have flown into the air to fight Wang Dong. Meng Hingchen had a question in her mind right now. Why hadn't the Vermilion Ice Toad's poison taken effect yet? The Vermilion Ice Toad's poison did engulf Huo Yuao and Wang Dong, but it was a pity that her poison was useless against them. Why was this? Only Huo Yuao understood why. This could only be traced back to the time when Huo Yuao caught hold of Bei Bei after he was defeated by the Ice Toad's poison. Oh. How could this be? Such a soul beast still exists. Ice Empress, what's going on? What's wrong with my eldest senior? He's contracted a very hateful ice toad poison. The martial soul that hurt him is a Vermilion Ice Toad, a soul beast that roams the borders of the extreme north. Its powers are quite extraordinary, although it's not really accomplished in the aspect of ice. It has managed to grasp the true meaning of the combination of ice and fire. That's why the ice toad's poison is extremely lethal and very difficult to be neutralized. Oh. Then what do we do? Ice Empress, can you neutralize this poison? I can't. That's because your partner cannot bear the ultimate ice's encroachment. He can only dispel the poison through the extreme chill in his own body. There's no other way. If that method is used, only an ice-type body can handle the burden. Otherwise, one's internal organs will be frozen. Will I be poisoned? Are you joking? As one of the 3 heavenly kings of the extreme north, I am the king of all ice-type soul beasts. Although the Vermilion Ice Toad is a rather strong soul beast, there's a reason why it doesn't dare to enter the extreme north region. That's because the ice jade scorpions are its chinks. While we gave up lethal poison to achieve the ultimate ice, we can't be hurt by any ice-type poison. You don't have to be afraid of her poison when you face her. No ice-type or fire-type poison can work against the ultimate ice. If Huo Yuao had to appraise which soul skill of his was the most powerful, it had to be one of the 4 soul skills that the Ice Empress conferred onto him. In terms of both offense and defense, the Ice Empress lived up to its name as one of the 3 heavenly kings of the extreme north. But if he had to choose the most practical soul skill, which one would he choose? If someone really understood his capabilities, he might think it was the spiritual detection. But Huo Yuao would certainly choose the Spirit Eye's second soul skill, imitation. Imitation was a 1,000-year soul skill bestowed onto him by the clan members that the Sky Dream Iceworm helped him to find. Among all of Huo Yuao's soul skills, imitation was the least offensively inclined, but it was the most important soul skill to him, even far more important than his spiritual detection. Although imitation was a 1,000-year soul skill, it depleted Huo Yuao's soul power the least when it was unleashed due to its special characteristic. Huo Yuao could sustain it for a very long time, and he wouldn't even be discovered by his opponent, unless his opponent's spiritual power was beyond his, and they could use a special spiritual detection power to see through him. The only pity was that imitation could only be used within a 3-meter radius with Huo Yuao as the center. Otherwise, this soul skill would have been unbelievably powerful. Huo Yuao was using imitation at this exact moment. Not only did his imitation prevent his opponent from seeing him, but it also prevented his opponent from seeing what he was doing. Even the spectators couldn't see. When imitation was used, Huo Yuao and Wang Dong were actually masked by a layer of transparent armor that seemed to be made up of diamond-like particles. Their entire bodies were covered. It was the Ice Empress barrier, Huo Yuao's strongest defense-type soul skill. It was one of the 2 soul skills bestowed onto him by the 400,000-year Ice Jade Empress Scorpion Soul Ring. The ultimate Ice's defensive strength reached its peak under the Ice Empress barrier. How could the Vermilion Ice Toad's poison overcome it? A dim radiance flashed. Huo Yuao and Wang Dong seemed to be the same entity now. In fact, Huo Yuao depleted more of his soul power than Wang Dong, who was attacking more actively. Spiritual detection sharing, spiritual interference, and the Ice Empress barrier. These soul skills were unleashed with all of Huo Yuao's might. Huo Yuao had managed to achieve significant progress in his cultivation and spiritual power after the constant improvements and enhancements of the life gold. His body was also able to bear more than what someone of his age should be able to, at least in terms of his physical strength. He was not weaker than Xiao Hinchen and Meng Hingchen. A dim radiance flashed, and Huo Yuao revealed a cold, divine radiance on his face. It was time to snatch the final victory. The countless sword projections that Meng Hingchen created as she waved her swords engulfed Wang Dong. The enhancements of her class 6 swords were all in terms of offense. They were extremely destructive, and had even hurt Dai Yuheng earlier. The Vermilion Ice Toad poison that it contained was also the most lethal. Although Meng Hingchen had lost the help of her soul tool to aid her in flying, her cultivation was still far beyond Huo Yuao and Wang Dong. When her swords were unleashed, they soared up immediately. The height of the defensive barriers on the competition stage had a limit. Meng Hingchen could reach this height with the extreme leaping abilities of the Vermilion Ice Toad. That's why no matter how impeccable Wang Dong's flying techniques were, he couldn't escape from her attacks. But Wang Dong didn't dodge. When Meng Hingchen jumped up, his radiant butterfly goddess wings flapped towards the front and propelled Wang Dong backwards. At the same time, a ball of golden light shone on his chest. From the edge of the radiant butterfly goddess wings, all the golden light started to gather towards Wang Dong's chest as countless golden spots appeared. A small sun seemed to have appeared in front of Wang Dong's chest. The radiance of this sun was extremely blinding. Meng Hingchen's attack stopped, and Wang Dong pushed the ball of light from his chest at this critical moment. It struck the center of Meng Hingchen's sword projections. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.